All right, we are recording. Everyone, welcome to our week 12 live classroom. Today we're going to be going over chapter 10, arrays. So let's go ahead and look at that. So what is an array? Very simply speaking, it is a collection of variables. So up to this point, we have declared a lot of variables. If I was going to review how to do that, let me pull up my text editor here. CIT160. Okay, so here's a very simple file. And you can see that on line 23 and line 24, I declare new variables. I can tell because I'm using the var keyword. Now, there are other keywords as well to declare new variables. I could say let x equals 5 or something like that, or const days in year equals 365, something like that, okay? These are all different ways of declaring variables. Anytime you use one of these keywords, you are allocating a new space in memory for that data to be stored. And when you want to access that data, you have to reference that location in memory by its name. So I have user input right here. And if I wanted to do something with whatever the user typed in, I would first assign it to user input. It would store that value in memory, and then I could access that value in memory or change it or do whatever I wanted with it later on simply by using user input. So I could be like var y equals user input. Okay, and what that would do is take whatever was in user input and assign it to the variable y, basically copying that variable, okay? Let does something very similar. I'm not really going to go into the difference of these two right now. If you'd like to Google it, you're more than welcome to. And then const declares a variable that is immutable, meaning that you cannot change it. So if I tried to say days in year equals 366, that would not work because when you declare a constant, you cannot change it, okay? So that was just a little bit of review on declaring variables. Now let's look at arrays. Okay, an array, you declare an array based the same way that you declare any other variable. However, it is able to store a large collection of data. Okay, each variable in an array is called an element and has a unique index. So let's say I have an array of people in this class right now. All right, I could say var people equals, and then I open up my square braces saying, hey, this is going to be an array, and I'm going to have Nathan and Colt and Henry. Okay, well, there is my people array. All right, and I could do all sorts of stuff with this array. I could print it out. I could make a loop to loop through this array. But the important thing here is that if I wanted to access any one of these values in this array, I would have to use a unique index. Because all this data is stored in one place, we need a way to access it. Otherwise, it'd be pointless. There'd be no point in using arrays. I might as well just use person 1, person 2, and person 3 in this case. But if I want to use an array, which I would want to, I could use what we call an index to identify each one of these. Okay, let's go ahead and look at a simple example. I'm going to go ahead and let me actually, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to a different file here. And I'm going to take all this out. Don't need any of it. And I'm going to take all this out. I just want to run some code. And I'll paste that there. I'm not going to call a function. Okay, and let's go ahead and run this and let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to copy this file path. And I'm going to put it in my browser. Hit F12. Now this already ran. Because it's not in a function, we usually put our code inside of functions. Because this isn't in a function, it already ran as soon as the page loads. So I'm going to refresh so we can actually stop on this breakpoint. Right now, people is undefined because what is to the right of my equal sign has not been assigned to people yet. So I'm going to hit F10 once, and now I can hover over people. And look at that. We have an array with a length of 3. We have each value in the array inside of quotation marks, and they're numbered. Those are their indices. They're unique indices. You could think of those as an address inside of an array. Okay, so with that said, let's go back in here and let's add another line of code here. Let's say alert people at index of 2. okay? So this will call the alert function, which gives us our little pop-up, all right? And I'm gonna say, hey, I want people at index of 2, all right? So indices are always 0-based, and they're separated by commas. It doesn't matter how much data, I could have a billion characters right here, or I could have a 0, it doesn't matter. But as long as I have a comma, it will make a new index for whatever came before that comma, all right? So this whole thing will be an index of 0, this will be index of 1, and this will be index of 2. Because arrays are always 0-based, they're always start at 0, there's no way around that. So let's go ahead and see what happens. People we have, 0, 1, and 2. 2 at that value, or at that index, is Henry, okay? So if I hit F8 and let this go, we should see a pop-up that just says Henry. Okay, so that's how I'm able to access a piece of data inside of an array, all right? So let's go into some more examples. Declaring, creating, and populating arrays, all right? So in my example, I did this last one. I declared, assigned, and populated all in one statement of code. I said var people equals Nathan, Colt, Henry, all right? Well, I can also declare an array just by declaring a variable, just an empty variable, var array name. This will basically just set aside a space in memory for some data. But at this point, we have no idea that it's actually an array, okay? I could also say, after that, I could say array name equals, and then say new array of a given size. I could be like, hey, I want to make an array of 5 values or 3 values or 25 or 50 or a billion. And then it will be like, okay, now I know how much space in memory to allocate, and it would take that array name variable, and in memory, it would allocate those 25 spaces or however much you want to store in there. The way that I could merge these two lines of code is just by saying var scores equals new array of 25. Or I could say var array name equals new array of size. So I can put those all into one line. And then at that point, if I wanted to add something, now we're looking at our scores array, if I wanted to add something to it, I can change any piece of data in there that I want to by accessing an address in memory. So if I said scores at index of 0 equals 50, that would add a value to that first index in that array. So let's look at that in action real quick. So I have people right here. And let's say I don't have to declare it again. Let's say I left the meeting and Fred joined. Okay, so this will take people at index of 0, which is the first value here. Okay, and it would replace whatever is currently there in memory with Fred. Same thing if I had like var x equals 5 and then x equals 2. Okay, it'll just replace that 5 in memory and it'll assign a 2 to be there wherever x is stored. All right, so let's look, actually I'll change 2 right there. All right, so let's look at that in action. I'm going to refresh this, hit F10, we have people, Nathan, Colt, Henry, and then people at index of 2. One thing that's really nice about the debugger in here is I can highlight from the beginning of people to the end of the closing bracket, and I can see what is going to be there. So currently, what's at people of index of 2 is Henry. All right, well, if I hit F10 and I look at people at index of 2, you can see now it's Fred, because I can treat that as its own variable. As if it wasn't even in an array, I can treat it exactly like I just did with x equals 5. Oh, now I'm gonna say x equals 2. Okay, I can do whatever I want, just like a regular variable. And then we'll go ahead and alert people at index of 2, which is Fred. Okay. All right. Array length. You'll notice, so right here, I'm declaring data, a new array of 8, potentially 8 values in it. And then I declare sizes. It looks like it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values in it. And right here, I can output data.length and sizes.length. All right, instead of running this code, I'm just gonna hit F5 in here and hit F10 to go past our people. You can see once I hover over people, we have our array with every value in it along with their indices, and length is an attribute right here. Okay, so this is an attribute available to every single array that will ever exist. All right, if we look at, here's an example, something that we have all done a lot, document. Okay, what exactly is document? Okay, we use it every single week. We use it to get values from the user. We use it to show data back to the user. But what is it? Okay, well, document, if I say document dot, my text editor here will show me every single thing that is inside of this document object. This is an object in JavaScript with a bunch of stuff in it. Among these is, let me find it, get element by ID, which is what we use every week. Okay, and like you saw, there's like hundreds of things inside of document that we haven't even touched. But if we ever wanted to, we could say, hey, what's the document URL, or what's the document size, or anything like that. Okay, but document.getElementById, this is a function inside of the document object. And in here, I could say get it by input, and I want to get the value of that. Look at this other dot. Okay, this means that inside of this function, there's another huge chunk of data. All right, so real quick, we're going to run this and we're going to look at all that data. So I have document.getElementById input.value, and we're just going to say var input. I'll say user input. Wow, sorry guys. Equals that, and this will error out if I don't put an input in here. So let's just say input, and we'll say ID equals input. Okay. All right. Now I need to put this in a function because this will load, this code will execute like that before I have time to input anything. So I'm going to put a function here. I'll say function testing. Move all this into it. Move all this down. And now we just need a button to call that. I'll say on click testing to call that function. Okay. So let's head back over here. We have, oh, I didn't put a label in there. That's okay, it'll still work. We have our breakpoint inside the function testing. Notice it didn't run this time because we haven't called the function testing. Let's go ahead and put in like 55 in here, and I'll hit my button, and it called it. Okay, we have our people array, good. We'll reassign Fred to Henry, sorry Henry. We'll alert people to, great. And now let's look, this is what we really care about, okay? We have document with all that stuff that we can see in our text editor as well, all right? And you'll notice for each one of these, well, not necessarily each, but a lot of them have a little arrow with more stuff in it, and then more stuff, and it just kind of keeps on going. There's so much data in here, it's pretty crazy. But if I highlight from the beginning of document to the end of that closing parenthesis, I can see what this input tag looks like. I can see everything in it. It has accept, alt, autocomplete, autocomplete, default checked, dir-name disabled, form, files, form action. So many things. Okay, look at this. I can set a max length on this. Did you guys know that? I can set a max length on an input. If I only wanted a user to input like a single digit, it could be like max length is 1 or something like that. But there's all this data in here, and among them is, let's find it, the one that we always use. I'm not finding it. These aren't alphabetized, but it's value. Okay, so I can hover over this whole thing or highlight this whole thing and see what value is going to be. And there's that 55 that I typed in. Okay, and that's what will get assigned over to user input. So anytime we have an object inside of JavaScript, we access items inside of that object with these dots. Okay, say, hey, document dot, I want to do something inside of that document. Okay, well, if document has all this stuff, I could potentially say document dot full screen element, or document dot on blur, or document dot on reset, or anything, because these are all valid attributes inside of document. Well, looking at arrays, if I hover over people, look at this. I have a couple of indices here, but then I also have this length. So if I want to access this attribute inside of this array object, I could say people.length. And as soon as I do that, it'll show me the length. So let's try that real quick. I'll say, let's see, document.getElementById. We'll say output.innerHTML equals, oh yeah, people.length. Lost my train of thought for a second. Okay, let's do something fun too. Let's declare this. Let's change this back to 0. Well, you don't need to alert people anymore since we're running this whole thing. We'll get the user input, and then I'm gonna add this to our array. I'll say people dot. Okay, now look at what my text editor does. Look at all this stuff. If we think about data types, people is an array, which means I can assume that for every single array I ever declare in JavaScript, I will have all of this stuff available to me. Now, if you want to learn more about this, you could be like this, JavaScript array. W3 schools will probably be, it's second. One of the first to show up, okay? And in here, we're declaring arrays just like we've done. Let's see here. Scrolling down. Holy lots of stuff. Where is it? Ooh, array methods. So JavaScript array methods, all right? Notice this toString function, okay, being called off of an array. Look at this dot again. So this is a function available to every array, all right? We have join, and it talks about what these all do. We have pop removes the last element from an array, okay? We have push, that's what we're gonna use right now. Adds a new element, kiwi, to fruits. Let's see what else we got. Shift, remove the first element from banana from fruits. Shift, unshift. Okay, there's a lot of functions here that you can use. So let's come back over here. So if I say people dot, and I can see all of them in here, and we're gonna use this push one. So I'm gonna say push, and I'm just gonna say user input. Okay, so right now, let's think about what this is doing. All right, we call the testing function, we declare people, we reassign people at index of 0, the value of Fred. We get a value from the user, and we're gonna add that to our array. So last time it was 55. So at this point, our array would probably look something like this. We'd have Nathan, we changed Nathan to Fred. We still have Colt, we still have Henry, and then we pushed 55 onto there. Okay, let's see it in action. And then we're just gonna output people.length. Okay, let's come back over here, refresh. I'll type in 55. Well, let's type in George. That makes more sense. We're dealing with people here. All right, still have my breakpoint here. People, Nathan, Colt, Henry. Now people is Fred, Colt, and Henry. Notice the length, it's still 3. All right, user input is George. And people dot push. Notice it recognizes push as a function here. User input, which is still George. Hit F10. Now look at that. We just added George to the end of our array. It's pretty slick. And then we'll go ahead and output people.length. Ooh, it didn't like that. Let's see what our error is. Uncaught type error, cannot set property inner HTML of null. Interesting. All right, so let's see this again. So I'm gonna hit F10, 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 F10. Right here, we have people. Dot length is 4. Ooh, this guy's null. Look, we didn't put an output div here. But did you guys see how I found that? Because I looked at people, and I'm like, okay, I see length right there. Hover over length is 4. But then if we go back to our error, it says cannot set property inner HTML of null, which means this inner HTML right here is being appended to something that equated to null, which means either my document has a typo or get element by ID has a typo or output doesn't exist, which it's the latter. So let's go ahead and add our output div. We'll say ID, output, whoops, refresh that, take out this breakpoint, and we should just see 4 pop up on here. And there it is. Okay. All right. Any questions up to this point?
So good.
Sweet. All right, well, then let's keep going. Accessing data in array, we've already done this a couple of times. All right. I took a screenshot of my developer tools at one point to again reiterate this. All right, but each value will show up on the right, each index will show up on the left. If I wanted to put 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 for all my values, I totally could. Those can all be the same. It doesn't matter. They won't override each other or anything because they all have a unique index. okay? This var data equals new array of 6, I don't think I've ever used. I mean, I've used it to teach, but I don't really ever do that when I'm coding. Generally, if I want to declare a new array, I will just go like this. And I don't know what's in it. I'll say var people equals empty brackets. That will create an array, all right? And usually I don't know what the size of the array is going to be. You know, let's say the user was going to type in something, or I was going to loop through and let them type in something as long as they wanted, or you know, I generally don't know what the length of an array is going to be. And even if I do, I can just populate it later on and be like, you know, people dot push X or something like that. And this would add X to the 0th index of people, okay? So generally I don't say var people equals new array of a given size. Generally I just create an empty array and I start adding data to it. But either one is fine. Let's undo some of this stuff. All right. Okay, let's come back over here. So right here we declared data, it allocates 6 spaces in memory, and we added data to several of them. Okay, we added data to index of 0, 1, looks like 4, and yeah. So lots of different ways you can do this. One thing also that's kind of dangerous with declaring an array of this size, with the size, is like in this case, index of 2 and 3 won't have anything in them. And that can give you some issues, you know, if you try to like run a function with data in an array. Let's say I have a loop and I'm looping through an array, and I'm going to call a function with a piece of data inside of every spot in that array. If one of them is null, I could get an error and it could make my program crash. So yeah. Okay, any questions on how to access data in an array? Sweet. All right, loops. Here we go. You guys, it is very rare, I feel like, that you will use an array without using a loop, because you generally want to do data, you want to do something with your array or with your data. So user string, oh, this is cool. Let's actually, let's leave our slideshow for a sec. Let's do this for reals. Okay, so I'm going to declare people, and that will give us, well, actually that wouldn't give us an error. User input, I'm going to rename this to user, comma, delimited list. I really should not use words that I don't know how to spell. Okay, delimited, that looks right. Okay, list. And then in here, I'll say, please enter a comma delimited list. Have our input, and we'll say people that push user input, and we'll loop through that in just a moment. Okay, first, oh, whoops. First, let's come into here. Let me pull up my browser real quick, and let's come back to this. We have all these methods. Let's search in here for like a comma. Is there a comma? Nope. How about this kind of a comma? Yeah, there's way too many of those. Okay, if I was going to Google JavaScript split string into array. Oh, nice. W3 School is the first thing that pops up. Okay, so we have this string.split method. Okay, notice string right here is a string data type. It's not an array, and it also has this dot. And I can see this JavaScript string right here, and we have all these functions for a string as well, which is really nice. So similar to our arrays, I also have a bunch of functions that I can use with strings. One of them is string.split. Okay, so let's see what happens when we use this. All right, we can test it out in here real quick. So I have the string, how are you doing today? If I split it, it's going to display it to the screen right here. So let's run that. And look at that. I just took out all of the spaces. Okay, and you see these commas here because it actually put them into an array. And when we just print out an array to the screen without doing any type of anything with it, it'll just print it like this, just with commas in the middle. So let's try that ourselves. Instead of pushing, I'm just going to say, move that down, equals user comma delimited list dot split, and we want to split it by each comma. All right. Okay, so I'm going to come back into our program and refresh it, and I'm going to put in Ted, Fred, Ed, George, and let's put a breakpoint in here to see what's going on. Okay, I'm going to run my function. Look at my beautiful string, Ted, Fred, Ed, and George. And then we have the string here, and split is recognized as a function. And what we're doing right here is we're saying, hey, I want to split by that comma and assign those values into a unique index inside of an array. So I hit F10, and look at what we got for people. Ted, up to that first comma, and then up to the next comma, up to the next comma, and then after that last comma. Okay, so notice got all those spaces in there. I probably wouldn't want those spaces, but I'll go ahead and hit F8, and we still have that 4 pop up because we put 4 values in there. Okay, if I wanted those spaces gone, we're telling this thing what to split by. So if I split by that, a comma and a space, let's see what happens. I'll say Fred, Ted, Ed, and George. Ooh, there's Ned too. I was thinking of things that rhymed with Ted. Okay, we have our comma delimited list, and we're splitting by a comma and a space this time. Let's hit F10 and see what we got. Look at that. Fred, Ted, Ed, and George, and Ned. Okay, with no spaces. That's pretty slick. Pretty nice way to make an array. Just tell the user to enter a comma delimited list or something, and bam, there's your array. Okay, now let's do something with that array. Okay, we got the length popping out here. That's great. Okay, let's actually do something with this. So if I come back over here, let's make a new variable. I'll just call it message, and it's going to be an empty string. Okay, one method that we've seen for strings that we've used quite a bit is message dot. Actually, we're not going to use that. I am just going to say plus equals people.length. Okay, and then if I output message right here instead of people.length, really all message is going to be is just 5 if I type in 5 numbers. Let's test it out. This time I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I should add spaces in here, otherwise it won't actually split this. Okay. We have people, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Notice the data types. If I wanted to do arithmetic with these, I'd have to parse each one. We'll do that in a sec. Message, empty quotes. We'll add that people.length to message. It'll just convert that 5 to a string, and then we'll go ahead and output that 5 on here. Okay, so now let's do something else. Right here, I'm going to say length of array. We'll add that. Okay, so nice string concatenation there. Let's go ahead and add a break right here as well. Oops. All right. And then let's go ahead and start a loop. I'm going to say for I equals 0, while I is less than, we're going to say people.length. All right, because let's think about our arrays real quick. If my array has, let's come back in here. I'm going to push this button again, and let's look at people right now. All right, it says array of 5. Oops, it says array of 5. It has a length of 5. That's an attribute that I can use anytime. And then it has these indices. So if I have I starting off at 0, and I say while I is less than array.length, well, that'll go right up to 4. And that'll isolate every single index in our array. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. So we say I equals 0, while I is less than people.length, I plus plus. And then we just got to say what we want to do in here with it. All right. Well, I'm going to say message plus equals. Let's go ahead and say people at index of I. Well, hey, first, let's just say the index. So we'll say index plus I. let's add a colon here. So we'll have index 2 is, add a space, plus, and then I actually want to get the value at that index. And so again, anytime I want to get the value at an index in an array, all I have to do is just say array at index of 0. And that'll give me the first value in the array. Well, in this case, we're using I, which is just an integer, which will go from 0 to 4 if the length of my array is 5. And every time it comes out, I'll just say index 1 is TED or whatever. Okay, we'll just add that onto our message. We're also going to add a break here, make it nice and pretty. And now we're going to just leave this the same. We'll go ahead and output message. So let's come back over here, hit refresh, and let's say Ted, Ed, George, Ned. I thought we had another one. Oh well. Okay, set our button here. Here's our beautiful comma delimited list. People, nice array, okay? And we have a length of 4. Message gets declared. It says length of array is 4, and we'll have a break. But we're not outputting anything yet. We're going to keep on adding to this message variable for when we actually decide to output to our div. Okay. I equals 0. People.length is 4. Come down to here. If I hover over I, again, it's just 0. And if I highlight people to the end of that bracket, it says TED. Okay, because people at index of 0 is TED. Okay, so I can get the index just with I, and I can put that I into my square brackets to get the value at that index. Okay, so if I highlight over this whole thing right here, it shows me index 0 colon TED break. Well, that's all going to be added on a message. And look at that. We have length of array 4 break index 0 TED break. Okay, let's keep on looping. All right, index is 1. People at index of 1 is going to be Ed. We added that onto there. We have TED break index 1 Ed break. Keep on going a couple more times. And let's go ahead and let it go. And here's what we have. We have length of array is 4. Index 0 is TED. Index 1 is Ed. Index 2 is George. Index 3 is Ned. Okay. So we didn't do too much with this array, but it's better than if we just wanted to print out this array like these guys did it, you know. Okay, any questions on anything we just did? It's pretty exciting stuff. It's pretty powerful stuff. All right, let's see what else I got for you guys today. Filling an array. Ooh, this is fun. So check this out. Var list equals new array of 80. We'll have 80 empty spots. Fill will pass in our array and a number. Okay, we get list and X. I'll say while I is less than list.length, which is going to be 80, which means our indices are going to go from 0 to 79. Okay, and that is what I is going to go through. Then we'll just say list at index of 0 through 79 equals X, which is 7. Okay, let's try that real quick. If I wanted to populate a new array, okay, I'm going to comment all, well, let's see here. Yeah, I'll comment all this out. Okay, I'm going to say var new array equals new array 50. And then we'll declare, we're going to call a different function here. We'll say function populate. We'll have an array and a value. All right. And then in here, we'll go ahead and call that. So I'll say populate. We'll pass in our new array and 5 or something. Okay. And then inside of populate, we'll go ahead and say for I equals 0, while I is less than list.length, I++. And we'll say list at index of I equals X. Okay, and this time let's go ahead and just say document.get ID output div, just output, right? Yeah. .inner HTML equals, and we'll just output that array there. Okay, let's run this and let's see what happens. hit and refresh. I'm gonna put a breakpoint inside of each one of these. I'm gonna hit my button. I'm not doing anything with the input right now. New array, let's see what it looks like. Has length of 50 with no indices because there's no data in it. Okay. Populate. We passed in that empty array of 50 into list, and we passed in 5 into X. List.length is 50. We'll go ahead and start looping through. You can see now I put in a 5 into index of 0 in that array. Okay, well now I is going to be 1. And so just now we put in X at index of 1. Okay, we'll keep on going until we're done. I'll hit F8, and there's our 55s. All right. Now, if I want to do something different with this, let's say I wanted to make an array that was just like counting. All right. Instead of passing in 2 values, I won't need 2 values. Actually, I could pass in 2 values. Let's say I want to start counting at 100 or something like that. All right. And I could also say, well, that'll be perfect. Okay. So I pass in my new array of 50, and I pass in 100. I'll still loop 50 times, but instead of just having X here, I'm going to go ahead and say, sorry guys, I'm going to go ahead and say X, we'll add X to that array, and then before we continue looping, I'll just say X++. All right, and so what that'll do, we'll add 100 to our array first, and then we'll increment X. And then we'll keep on looping, and we'll keep on incrementing. All right, if we ran that, I'm not going to put a breakpoint in there, we'll just hit run. So you have 100, 101, 102, 103, because we keep on incrementing that number that was passed in by the user, all the way up to 149. An easier way to do this is just say X plus I. Okay, I take that out because I'm already incrementing I. I is going to be 0. And so if I ran that again and hit my button, see it's the exact same thing, 100 through 149. Okay.
Plus equals X after the list?
So right here, I just said, I didn't use plus equals because list at index of I doesn't have anything to add to at this point. It's empty. And so X would be 100 this first time, and I'm just going to add 0 to it. That's why we printed 100. Well, then I gets incremented up to 1, and so I'd say list at index of I equals 100 plus 1. So it gave us that 101. And then I kept on incrementing, and so X actually never changed. We just assigned X plus whatever I was, those 50 times to this list, this array. So, all right, what else we got? Summing the values of an array. Okay, we're not going to run this, but look at this function. All right, this is a function called sum, and this would work with any array as long as it's an array of numbers. But no matter what, whether it's 2 numbers or 5 billion numbers, it would loop through this array, and it would add every value onto sum, and then it would return the sum. Okay, so we declare sum beforehand, and now we're using plus equals because we want that data to persist each time we loop. We're not assigning a new value into S, we're just adding to it. And so if a user typed in, okay, I lied, we're gonna run it real quick. Let me have one other function down here. I'll say function sum, and we'll pass in a list. And here we'll say for I equals 0, while I is less than list.length, length I plus plus. Okay. And in here, we're going to say var sum. Whoops, that'll give us an error. Equals 0. So I have something to start with for my addition. And I'll say sum plus equals list at index of I. Okay. And then I'll return that S, that sum. Okay, so I could use this function anytime. If you guys wanted, you could make just like a file with all your functions that you could reuse over time, and that'd be totally fine. Excuse me. All right, let's see, it looks like I got an error in here. What is it? Expected a semicolon. Oh, whoops. All right, so this testing function, let's go ahead and use some of this stuff. I'm going to take all of that out. And that, we don't need populate anymore. We will need that. Okay, we're going to output some user array. I'll say split array. Okay, we'll have a user comma delimited list. I'll say var split array equals user comma delimited list dot split by the comma. Okay, and then we'll call sum. We'll pass in our split array. It'll go through, it'll loop through the entire array, adding on to S, and it'll return S, and that sum will be printed right here. Okay, so let's save that. Let's come back over and run it, and let's throw in some numbers here. Okay, hit our button, and ooh, that is wrong. I mean, I put in some big numbers here, but nothing that big. Let's look what happened. Let's put a breakpoint in here, and let's run it again. All right, so our list, look at that beautiful list. Okay, we'll probably be up around like 2,000 max. Well, maybe a little bit more. Okay, but that's our list. Okay, but notice the data type of all this stuff in here. They're strings. I know that because they're all in quotes. Okay, so sum is also a string, S. Okay, or I mean, sorry, it's a number, it's not a string. But if I come into here and I have list at index of I, if I highlight that, I can see that it is a 1 in quotation marks. Well, when I add that on to S, it will just append it. Look at that, 0, 1. That's horrible arithmetic. Okay, let's see. I is now 1. List at index of I, if I highlight that, it's 2. So what's it going to be? Is it going to be 3 or is it going to be 0, 1, 2? Well, it's still going to append it because they're all strings. So every single time that it goes through, it's just going to append it onto that string. It's going to concatenate it. So let's take that breakpoint out because yeah, that's just wrong. In here, we can fix that really easily by parsing this value first. I actually don't even need a line there. I can just say parse. We could make it a float in case the user typed in a float value. But now it'll convert whatever number is there as a string into a number, and then it'll add that onto S. And hopefully it'll actually compute it this time. So we type in some numbers, and we hit our button. That looks better, 10,747, okay? Because this time, let me put a breakpoint right here. If I come back over here, we have parse float, which is our function. List, I is 0. If I highlight this, you can see that this is still a string of 1. But if I highlight this around the function, now it's a number, okay? And it can handle adding that number, computing that arithmetic onto S every time, okay?
I'm actually really impressed on how fast you put.
Lots of practice. All right, let's see what else we got over here. Finding a specific value. Okay, this is super common as well. Because let's say we had like 50 students in this classroom and we had 13 classes taught over the semester, and I wanted to see how many times Colt attended a live classroom. All right, well, if I had 13 arrays that each had all the students that were in my live classrooms, and I wanted to count how many times Colt had been in my live classrooms, I would want to be able to find Colt inside of that array. All right, so looking at this, this is what is called a linear search, which means we're just going to go from 0 up to the length of the array as far as indices go, and we're going to look for a specific value. So in this case, list right here, whoops, can I go back? Nope. List in this case is just like what we used last time. It's just an array being passed into this linear search function. Key is another parameter that we didn't have before, and it's what I want to search for. So in this case, it'd be Colt. All right, it'd just be a string. I loop through the exact same way. This first line for my for loop is exactly the same as before. But now in here, I say if list at index of I equals key. So if list at index of 0 equals Colt, then I'll return that index. Hey, yeah, Colt, we found Colt in this array, and he's at index of 0. Otherwise, I'll keep on looping at index of 1, index of 2, index of 3, until my array was maxed out, until I reached the last value in that array. And if at any point my key was equal to a value inside of that list, I would return the index that it matched. Otherwise, at the very end, I'll return -1. -1, you might be like, well, why would you return -1? That's just a very common way to see things if you can't find a match, because arrays are zero based. You never know how big they're going to be, so it wouldn't work to like return 1,000,000 if it didn't find a match. If you wanted to, you could do -2 or -1,000,000, but it's just really common to see -1 if there wasn't a match. And that is how you could find Hey, sorry, I think I lost you for a sec.
We'll get you back now.
Okay, good. All right. Do you hear everything else I said about this? Were we good here as far as finding a specific value in the array?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. I just realized I'm not sharing. Let me share my screen again. All right. So let's look at parallel arrays. Let's say I have multiple pieces of data that are all correspondent pieces of data. Let's say I'm talking about a student, and his first name is Fred, and his last name is Jones, and his phone number is a phone number, and he has a student ID. I could potentially have what we call parallel arrays, which means for Fred, I would store all of his information at index of 0 in all of my arrays. And then for George, I'd store all of his information at index of 1 in my arrays. So if I was going to write that out in code, it might look something like this. I have var first names equals, whoops, Fred, George. Okay. And then I have var last names equals Jones and Anderson. And then var I numbers equals, oops, or something like that. And then I could assume that anytime I have a comma, it's going to basically indicate a new person. So my first names, I have Fred Jones, and this is his I number. And then I have George Anderson, and this is his I number. If I wanted to add an address or a track or anything else, I could. And I could just make a new array, and then I would know, hey, Fred is my 0 index guy. George is my 1 index guy, or something like that. Okay. And then anytime I wanted to add something or change something, let's say I had like var phone numbers equals, and we'll have like some phone number there and some phone number there. We might actually want to store these as strings so that we can put hyphens in them. Wow, that would be it. There we go. Okay. And so we're going to put those in strings. All right. And so we have Fred and George with all this data for each one of them. Let's say I wanted to change George's phone number, and I have no idea what his ID is or anything like that. Here's how we would do it. First, I would have to find George inside of an array. Now, potentially, I would have a bunch of Georges. Okay. So let's say the user typed in a number. Let's say that George's ID is actually 55. Okay. And up here, I'm going to say I number to search for. All right, so the user is going to type in a number. I'm going to parse that number just because it's a number and not a string. All right, I have these arrays declared. I'll go ahead and put these up top. We'll declare them first. And then the user types in a number to search for. And then we are going to print up all the data for that user. So first, we have to finally say for. Colt, are you still there?
Okay. I'm still there.
Yep. Sorry, my computer's doing something funky.
Yeah, mine just shut off and brought me back in. So.
Okay. So I'm going to say I equals 0, while I is less than I numbers dot length I plus plus. And here we'll say if I numbers at index of I is equal to I number to search for. Then we'll say found ID equals I, or something like that. Or I should say found index. All right. With that, we're going to use that index, and I'm going to say var message equals first name is first names at index of found index. And then I'll say message plus equals last name is last names at index of found index. Okay, copy that a couple more times. We'll say I number is I numbers at the found index, and then we'll have phone numbers. Let's go ahead and add a break to each one of these. Cool little hotkey for you guys. I selected a string, in this case just a semicolon. If I hit Control D a couple of times, I can add cursors to each one of those lines. And I'm also going to add a break to each one of these. Okay. And then I'm just going to output message. Okay. So let's see what happens. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Will found index throw a error because we're not verifying, or we're not? Yes, thank you.
Yes, good call. So I'm going to declare found index as -1 because currently we don't have an index found. But we're going to reassign that. And then right here, I could say if found index is greater than -1, then I'll add all that into there. Let's go ahead and declare var message up here too as an empty string. And then right here, I won't need to declare it. Let's add a plus. Otherwise, if we didn't find one, I'll say message plus equals, please enter a new I number, or no results found or something. All right, let's run this. F5, and let's put in an I number. Let's do like 56. We run it. Please enter a new I number. Let's try 55. First name George, last name Anderson. I number is 55. Phone number is that. Okay, so we were able to go through, use all the data in these parallel arrays just by finding a single index. Okay, once we found the index that we were looking for George Anderson, we could get data from all these arrays just by using that index. Okay. All right, any questions on this one?
I think.
Okay. Last thing before I go on, objects. Okay. You don't really use parallel arrays very often. Okay. Generally, you will have what you call an object. Okay. So an object is similar to document. You have a bunch of stuff in it. All right. But instead of having 4 arrays for this kind of data, I could say var student equals, and I have my curly braces, and I could say first name equals George. And I have a comma, and I'd say last name hey, looks like we cut out again. Colt, can you hear me okay? Student array.push equal or push student. Okay, so I know that we cut out for a second. But right now I made an object for a single student. Okay, inside this object,
will you share your screen?
Again, oh yes, thank you. Okay, so inside of an object in JavaScript, it's similar to an array because I can store as much data that I want to, but things aren't identified by an index, okay? Instead, they are identified as a unique attribute that we can call anything. So I have first name, last name, I-number, and phone number. I have a single object that is inside of my variable called student. Well, I can have an array of objects, and I could put a single student into my student array, all right? And then, let's say I wanted to add another one. I wouldn't have to declare student this time. Let me push all this back, whoops. Okay, for this student, I want to do all of Fred's stuff. Okay, so I'm going to grab Fred and Jones and his I-number and his phone number. Okay, and then I would just push that again. Okay, so then I wouldn't need all these parallel arrays. Okay, I'm just going to have a single array of objects. All right, and then I can just push new students to that array anytime I wanted to. If I had a form with like multiple inputs, I could have the user input a first name and a last name and say add person to array, and they could add it to this array themselves. We'll still have a number to search for, and we'll still loop through. But then in here, instead of accessing it like that, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to say we're going to have to loop through our student array. Okay, and then if student array at index of I, because it's a value inside of this array, dot I number is equal to I number to search for, then we found our index. Okay, and then in here, we'll go ahead and do, for each one of these, I'll say student array at index of found index, dot, and then we'll need each one of these guys. Okay, we'll be able to print out each one of those. Okay, let's run this real quick. I know we're just about out of time. Refresh this. Oh, looks like we got an error. Oh, it's my bad syntax. So these equal signs need to be colons. Same with these ones for declaring an object. All right, refreshing, error's gone. I'm gonna type in 55 to search for something. Let's put a breakpoint right here, and we'll call our function. So there's what an object looks like. Really similar to an array, except it's not, we don't have any IDs. Okay, if I wanted to look at the first name of an object, I totally could. Really similar to the way that I do with an array, except I would just use a dot to say, hey, student dot first name, and I could see what that looks like. Okay, so I have this student, and I have my empty student array. I'm gonna push that new student into my array, and you can see I have an array with an index of 0, and at that index is my student object. All right, and then I make a new student, Fred Jones. I'm going to push into my student array, and my array in and of itself has 2 indices, a length of 2, and each one is a student object. Okay, and then I number to search for, we typed in 55. We'll loop through the exact same way, except this time when we do our check, I have more data in this array because I have like 4 chunks of data in each attribute in this array. So now I have to say student array index of I, and I see what that is, and it is George Anderson. And then I say dot I number, and I can see what is at that value, and it's 55. And if that's the number that we looked for, it is. We found our index, and it's index of 0. And then we can come down into our next piece of code, which is if found index is greater than -1, which it is, then we'll go ahead and say student at index of 0, which found that object of our student. And then we have this first name attribute, which is George. So we'll go ahead and print that out. We'll print out last name, I number, and phone number. We'll let that go, and there's that. Okay, so this is definitely more to look at, but it's 3 less arrays. Instead, you just have an array of objects, and this is much more common to see in the professional world, is to have just all the data of a single entity stored in the same place, and then I would have an array of those entities instead of having parallel arrays. So, all right, you guys, I went through a lot today. I hope that it was helpful. Do you have any questions before we call it?
I don't have any questions right now, but I'll probably have some as I'm doing it. So I'll go from there.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I hope you guys have a great week. And again, if you have any questions, just feel free to post on Slack. So, Colt, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yep, bye-bye.